Hello, my gorgeous friends of Webflow. It's your friendly neighborhood Francesco from Supasito here. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most powerful and, honestly, one of the trickiest new features in Webflow. GSAP-Powered Staggered animations, built visually using the new animation UI. We'll take a simple heading, like the one on my friend Lydia's website, link in the description, and we'll learn how to animate word by word or letter by letter. But this isn't just about clicking some settings and calling it a day. We'll understand exactly what stagger, offset, split text, and even stagger easing really do. By the end of this, you'll be fully equipped to create animations that feel intentional, elegant, and precisely timed. No messy guesswork. If you're looking forward to it as much as I am, stick around, and if you find my videos helpful and want to support my work, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. But now, if you're ready, let's dive in. Let's start by saying that this section was originally built using the hero section from my friend Lydia's website. I'll drop the link in the description. If you're looking for inspiration or if you need a designer who can truly deliver stunning work, I strongly encourage you to check it out. Now, we're not going to focus too much on the section structure here. That's not really the point. All you need to know is that we have a heading, H1, a short descriptive paragraph, a simple navigation menu, and another element that communicates availability and invites users to connect. The real goal of this video is to simply experiment, nothing overly ambitious, with Webflow's new animation interface powered by GSAP. We'll use it to animate these elements on page load. For example, we'll animate individual words or letters one at a time using the split text functionality from GSAP. So, enough talking, let's get experimenting. Where do we start? First, let's head over to the Interactions panel. If, on the right hand side, you're still seeing the same old interface, the one from before Webflow released the new GSAP-powered system, no worries. That just means we need to make a quick change. Go down to the bottom of the panel and open the drop-down where it says Classic Interactions. From there, select Interactions with GSAP. Now, on the left sidebar, you might see a new icon appear, Lightning Bolt. That's a new interactions panel, where all the interactions you create with GSAP will be listed. Right now, of course, it's empty. We haven't started having fun yet. To create a new interaction, you can either click the plus icon in this new interactions menu and choose a trigger type, or you can use the trigger menu on the right hand side, which is what we'll do in this case. What we're looking for is the page load trigger. Once we click it, Webflow will suggest a few predefined actions. You can even click Show More Actions to explore things like staggered animations. But for this tutorial, we want to experiment freely with the new system and build something custom. So we'll simply click on Custom. Now, the first thing we can do on the right-hand panel is rename the interaction. By default, it's called Page Load Interaction, but you can click on it and rename it. Personally, I like to use a naming convention that includes the page name in parentheses. So, in this case, I'll name it something like Home Page Load. This helps keep things clear, especially when you're managing multiple interactions. You can hit Enter to confirm the change. Now, if we look right below, where Webflow has written Custom, we can see the first action inside our new interaction. But what's an action? Basically, it's a group of property transformations, a way to transition certain values from a starting point to an end point. And these transformations are applied to one or more targets that we define just below, in the target section. So, again, an action is a group of animations that changes certain properties from one value to another and applies them to specific targets. If you click the arrow icon next to Actions, you'll see a list of all the actions within the current interaction. In this case, the one we just created, triggered on page load. From here, you can add more actions using the plus icon or rename, duplicate or delete existing ones. You can also click an action to edit further. For now, let's stick to the default one Webflow created for us. If we hover over its name, we'll see a little pencil icon. You can click that to rename it, or click the three-dot icon and choose Rename. Let's call this action Heading Split, because what we want to do is create an animation that splits a heading, animating it word by word or letter by letter. Click Rename to confirm. Webflow has automatically added a default target, and if we click it, we can see it's targeting all elements that match a certain class. Specifically, it's targeting the Hero Section Navbar class, which just happens to be the element we had selected in the navigator when we started creating the interaction. By the way, if you want to bring back the navigator view on the left panel, just click the navigator icon to reopen it and get a clear look at the structure of your page. Back to the target settings. Instead of using a class-based selector, which won't work here because our H1 doesn't have a class, we'll use a custom selector. Webflow tells us that this option allows us to define custom CSS selectors for targeting specific elements. So we'll select custom selector and type H1, because that's what we want to animate. You might notice that the scope is set to all matching elements. And that's fine. Even on a complete page, as long as your SEO setup is correct, there should only be one H1 per page anyway. Click outside the pop-up to confirm. Right below, we now see more parameters: duration, start, and ease. Duration is, as you'd expect, the length of the animation. By default, it's set to 0.25 seconds. You can click this little S icon to switch between seconds and milliseconds. Start is actually a delay. If you enter 0.1, it means that the animation will begin 0.1 seconds after the page load. Same here, you can choose the unit of time. Now, just a quick note. If you enter a start value like 0.6, the action might visually disappear from the timeline at the bottom. That's not a bug, it's just a zoom issue. To fix that, you can either click the zoom out icon a few times or simply hit Fit Timeline to auto-adjust the zoom so everything becomes visible again. We'll fine-tune these values later. Lastly, we have ease, which is the easing function applied to all the transformations inside this action. By default, it's set to power1.in. I've heard expo.out looks really nice, so let's go ahead and use that for now. The properties listed under the Animated Properties section refer to the elements defined by the targets we've added. As you can see, there is also an Add Target button in case we want to animate additional elements. So again, these are the properties we want to transform, meaning we'll be animating them from an initial value to a final value for the selected targets. By default, Webflow gives us a few options: opacity, move X, move Y, scale. For our heading, we'll keep it simple. We want to animate it upward from below and fade it in from 0% to 100% opacity. That means we only need opacity and move Y. We can delete the other properties by clicking the minus icon next to each one. And if needed, we can always add more properties later by clicking the plus icon, which opens a list of available transformable properties. Now, something really important to note here is the type setting. It's the first option within this section, and it determines how the animation is calculated. If you hover over the little info icon, Webflow explains that the type defines how the values of the properties are animated. There are three different options. The default one is 2. This means we're animating toward a final value, starting from whatever value is currently set on the element in the designer. So, for example, if our heading has an opacity of 100% in the designer and we set the animation to 50%, the element will animate from 100% to 50%. We can click the play button here to preview it. And yes, the heading fades out to 50% opacity. Second option is from to. This lets us explicitly define both the starting and ending values. Let's say we want to animate from 0% to 100% opacity. We can set from 0% to 100% and click play to preview. Let's also reset the delay to 0 so we don't have to wait, and increase the duration to 1 second for clarity. Clicking jump to start resets the timeline cursor, and now when we hit play we can clearly see the heading animating from 0% to 100% opacity. If it feels a bit too fast, it's likely due to the easing function currently selected. Try changing it to none, a linear transition, and the effect becomes much easier to follow. Now let's switch it back to Expo Out, which gives a more polished easing feel. Finally, we have from. This option lets us define a starting value only. The animation will go from that value to the current value in the designer. So again, if the heading is currently at 100% opacity and we define a from value of 0%, the text will fade in from 0% to 100%. So in this specific case, from and from to behave the same. But if we were to add a to value of, let's say, 50%, then the animation would go from 0% to 50% instead. That's where the difference comes in. In our case, we're only interested in a from animation, because we want the words or letters to animate from 0% opacity to their current state, which is 100%. So all we need to do is making sure to uncheck the to box and set the initial value for opacity to 0. As for the vertical movement, the easiest way to get that upward motion we want, where words or letters rise from below, is to set the initial Y value to 100%. Later on, we'll also apply a masking effect to the individual elements, but for now, this value alone gives us a solid starting point. Hit play to preview. And yes, we now get a basic slide-in plus fade-in animation applied to the entire heading. No stagger yet, no masking, but we're getting there. While we're here, before moving on to the stagger effect, let's take a quick look at the repeat property. By default, repeat is set to 0, which means the animation will play only once. But if you want to create a looping animation, this is where you do it. Try entering a value of 1. You'll see a second copy of the animation appear in the timeline, because Webflow is now showing that the animation repeats once after the initial run. You can drag the timeline cursor to preview this visually, or just hit play to see the animation play twice. If we set repeat equals 3, that means the animation will run 4 times total. 1 initial run plus 3 repeats. So the number you enter here is the number of extra repeats. There's also a checkbox for infinite, which will run the animation in an endless loop. Obviously not useful in this particular context, so we'll leave that unchecked. Then there's back and forth, which works in combination with repeat. Let's say we set repeat equals 1 and enable back and forth. Here's what happens. The animation plays once and then it plays again in reverse. That reverse playback counts as the first repeat. If you set repeat equals 2, the animation will play forward, play backward, play forward again. So, in total, that's 3 animation cycles. Forward, backward, forward. In our case though, we're not interested in repeating the animation at all. So, we'll reset the repeat value by clicking the repeat label and choosing reset. Now let's focus on what really matters here. The stagger property and the split text checkbox. These are the keys to the animation we're trying to build. Now comes the fun part, but also possibly the most confusing one. Stagger, followed by split text. Let's start with Stagger. By default, it's set to none, which means no stagger effect is applied. But we can change that by selecting either total time or offset time. We'll go through both, starting with total time. Now, even if we enter a random value, say 3 seconds, and play the animation, absolutely nothing happens. Why? Because there's nothing to stagger. So, what is stagger exactly? Stagger simply means that the animation is applied to multiple targets, one after the other, rather than all at the same time. Each target gets animated based on the stagger configuration, which includes duration, type, and additional options like from, ease, and grid. We won't cover grid in this tutorial actually, it's a bit more advanced and needs more specific examples. But here's the key point. If we only have one target, enabling stagger won't do anything, because there's nothing to stagger across. Right now we're only animating a single H1, so even if we turn on stagger, the result is the same. So how do we test how stagger works? Especially when we want to use it later with split text. Easy peasy, we temporarily add a second target. Let's use this paragraph here, the subheading inside our hero section. Click the plus icon under target, set the type to class, and begin typing subheading. Select the matching class Webflow suggests and click outside the field to confirm. Now, let's reset stagger back to none, just for a moment, and hit play. We can see that both elements, the heading and the subheading, animate simultaneously. But now let's switch stagger type to total time and set the value to 1 second. What this does is it defines the total duration of the stagger effect, not the animation itself. Since each element's animation lasts 1 second, as defined in the properties above, the stagger adds an extra delay between them. So the first element animates, then the second one starts after 1 second. Total animation time 1 plus 1 equals 2 seconds. You can preview it and see exactly that. First element animates, then the second. Now let's try the other option, offset time. With offset time, the value you enter is the delay between the start times of each target's animation. So if you enter 1 second, that means the second element will begin its animation 1 second after the first element starts. This still results in a total animation duration of 2 seconds, in our case, and visually it looks the same. Try changing the offset to 0.5 seconds. That tells Webflow, start the second animation half a second after the first begins. Now play the animation again and you'll see the effect clearly. If we go back to total time and set it to 0.5 seconds, that tells Webflow to complete the entire stagger effect within 0.5 seconds. Since the animation for each element still lasts 1 second, the effect is essentially the same. The second stagger begins 0.5 seconds after the first, because that's the time available for staggering between two elements. So in this case, regardless of which method we choose, offset time or total time, the result will be identical, because we're only dealing with two elements. Just remember, offset time is the delay between each target's animation start. Total time is how long the entire stagger effect should take to apply across all targets. This behavior stays the same no matter what duration we've defined for the individual animations. So, how can we really see the difference between total time and offset time? By adding another target. Now, yes, we could jump straight into using split text and apply it to individual letters, which is exactly what we'll be doing later, but I want to make sure the stagger logic is crystal clear before adding another layer of complexity. So let's add another target. For example, the hero section availability wrapper. Click the plus icon under target, select class and type availability. We're interested in the second result, the wrapper, and since there's only one on the page, we'll go with all matching elements. Right now, the Stagger type is set to offset time, with a value of 0.5 seconds. If we look at the timeline, we see that the total duration of the animation is 2 seconds, which makes sense. With offset time, each new animation starts a fixed amount of time after the previous one. So, the second animation starts 0.5 seconds after the first, and the third animation starts 0.5 seconds after the second, or 1 second after the first. Since each animation lasts 1 second, and the last one starts after 1 second, the full sequence ends after 2 seconds. And we can confirm this by dragging the timeline cursor or clicking play. Now, let's switch to total time, keeping it at 0.5 seconds. You'll notice that the total duration of the animation shrinks, because now 0.5 seconds is the total duration of the stagger effect, not the time between each element. With 3 targets, we have 2 stagger intervals, from element 1 to 2, and from element 2 to 3. So, if we divide 0.5 seconds across 2 intervals, each stagger step is 0.25 seconds. That means the animation of the second element starts 0.25 seconds after the first, and the animation of the third element starts 0.25 seconds after the second, or 0.5 seconds after the first. Each animation still lasts 1 second, so the whole sequence finishes in 1.5 seconds. And again, you can preview this with play. That's the fundamental difference. Offset time means fixed time between each animation start. Total time means total stagger duration split across all stagger intervals. Now let's take a look at the from option. This defines where the stagger sequence starts. By default, it's set to start, meaning the first element gets animated first, then the second element, and finally the third. That's what we've been seeing so far. But if we change it to center, things change. The middle element animates first, in our case the second one, followed by first and third simultaneously. Using offset time with center, you'll notice something interesting. The first and the third elements animate 1 second after the middle one, even though our offset is set to 0.5 seconds. Why? Because with 3 elements, you still have 2 total or potential intervals, and offset time equals 0.5 seconds applies per interval. So, middle element animates at 0 seconds, first and third animate after 2 offset steps. 0.5 plus 0.5 equals 1 second, which means the offset is now fully applied to the single interval between the center and the outer pair. Now let's switch to total time equals 0.5 seconds. Since we still only have one actual interval, the one between the center element and the outer pair, the full 0.5 seconds is applied to that single stagger step. So, middle element animates at 0 seconds, first and third animate together after 0.5 seconds. Next, we have the end option. This starts with the last target, followed by the second, then the first. With 3 elements, that means third animates first, then second, then first. If we're using total time equals 0.5 seconds, it gets split across the 2 intervals again. So each new animation starts every 0.25 seconds. If we're using offset time, each animation starts 0.5 seconds after the previous one. So, in terms of timing, everything is just like with start. In other words, while the order changes, the spacing logic between the animations stays the same. Then we have edges, which is interesting. It starts by animating the first and last elements simultaneously, and then moves inward, animating the center element last. So, first plus third animate together, second animates afterward. With offset time, this again creates only one interval, the one between the outer elements and the center element. So, the full offset, which should have been split across two steps, gets applied all at once, resulting in a 1 second delay if your offset was 0.5 seconds. With total time, 0.5 seconds is distributed over the one actual stagger step, so the center animates 0.5 seconds after the first and last. Then we have random, which is straightforward. It plays the animation in a random sequence. The start point is chosen randomly and the order is unpredictable. Other than that, it behaves like start in terms of timing. Last but not least, element at. This lets you define a specific index in the list of targets as the starting point. 0 means first target, and everything behaves like start. 2 means third target, and in this specific case, everything behaves like end. Anything greater than the number of elements minus 1 is treated like end. For example, if you set it to something like, 500, it still starts from the last one, because it exceeds the index range. If you choose a middle index, like 1, the second element, it behaves like center in this specific case. So, second element will animate first, and then first and third together. Now let's add a fourth target to test this more clearly. And we'll use the navbar, added via class, just like before. Now we have 4 targets, and if we choose 1, second element, as the element at index, the sequence will be animate the second element, then the first and third together, then the fourth. With total time equals 0.5 seconds, we now have 2 intervals. So 0.25 seconds after the second, the first and the third animate. 0.25 seconds later, the fourth animates. If we switch to offset time equals 0.5 seconds, there are 3 total intervals, but only 2 are actually used. So that 0.5 plus 0.5 plus 0.5 equals 1.5 offset sum, which is redistributed across 2 intervals, resulting in 0.75 seconds between each. So, second element animates at 0 seconds, then the first and the third together animate at 0.75 seconds, and finally the fourth animates at 1.5 seconds. This is how offset time should be interpreted in this case. We'll take a closer look at the easing property shortly, so let's skip it for now. As mentioned earlier, we won't cover grid in this tutorial either. It's a more complex setting that would probably require a different layout or use case to fully understand and demonstrate. So finally, let's explore the split text option. As Webflow explains, split text breaks text elements into individual words, line, or characters for staggered animations. And of course, it only works with text elements. Let's enable it. By default, Webflow chooses to split the text by word. So, if you apply this to our heading, Lydia Santoyan, it will treat it as 2 separate words. We have 2 other split options. Line splits the text based on how it wraps across multiple lines. In our case, since the heading has 2 words and each is on a separate line, this is basically the same as splitting by word. Then we have letter, which splits the text into individual characters. In this example, we'll try both word and letter, but we won't use line, since in our case it behaves identically to word. Then there's the mask setting, which can be either none or match the current split type. For example, word or letter. So, if you split by word, the mask options are none and word. If you split by letter, you'll get none and letter. So, what does mask actually do? Webflow explains, wraps each word in a clipping container for smooth word reveal effects. In other words, it visually hides each word or letter inside a masked container, so that when it animates, it feels like it's revealing itself, like it's sliding out of a hidden space. Now we're finally ready to create the actual animation we want. Since we've been adding all these extra targets just for the sake of explaining Stagger behavior, we no longer need them. Let's remove all the targets except the first one, our H1 heading, which is the only one we care about now. And here's the setup. Stagger type, offset time. From, start, split by, word. Mask, enabled, set to word. Now, if we bring the timeline cursor back to the start and hit play, we already know what to expect. We have two words, and with offset time equals 0.5 seconds, the first word starts animating immediately and the second word animates 0.5 seconds later. Now let's switch to total time. Again, we know exactly what's coming. We only have one stagger interval between the two words. So, 0.5 seconds gets fully applied to that single step. So once again, the second word starts animating 0.5 seconds after the first. In this case, the result is visually identical to offset time, because our text only has two parts and the behavior of the stagger logic is the same. Things get more interesting when we switch to ladder. So, what happens in this case? Well, we no longer have just two elements to animate. The entire heading, our target, has now been split letter by letter, which means we have multiple elements in the animation sequence. Let's go back to offset time. What do we expect? We expect that each letter will begin its animation 0.5 seconds after the previous one starts. And that's exactly what happens. The first letter animates, after 0.5 seconds the second letter animates, then after another 0.5 seconds the third one starts, and so on and so forth. We can click play and watch it. Each letter animates in sequence, with a 0.5 second delay between them. Now let's switch to total time. Once again, we already know what to expect. The value we enter, in this case 0.5 seconds, will be evenly distributed across all stagger intervals. And we remember from earlier, the number of stagger intervals is equal to the number of animated elements minus 1. So let's count our letters. We have 13 letters in total, which means 12 stagger intervals. Therefore, the delay between each letter animation will be 0.5 seconds divided 12, which is roughly 0.04 seconds. This means all the animations will be very close together, each one starting just a fraction of a second after the previous one. We can confirm this by dragging the timeline cursor or hitting play. And yes, the animation feels smooth and tightly packed. And that would be all, except we haven't talked yet about the last option, ease. So, what does this additional ease property actually do? Didn't we already have a ease setting earlier? Yes, but as you might guess, even though they share the same name, they refer to two completely different things. The first ease setting, the one in the target group, controls the easing function of each individual animation, applied to a single element, letter, word, line or entire block, depending on the split text setup. The second ease property, the one we're discussing now, affects the distribution of stagger intervals. In other words, it controls the spacing between the start time of each animation in the stagger sequence. If you leave this property as none, the distribution is evenly spaced. So, for example, if you're using total time with a duration of 0.5 seconds, and your animation includes 13 letters, which means 12 stagger intervals, each interval will last, we've already said that, 0.5 divided 12, which is roughly 0.04 seconds. Likewise, with offset time equals 0.5 seconds, each interval simply lasts 0.5 seconds, no matter how many elements. But if you select an easing function here, the Stagger intervals will follow the mathematical curve defined by that easing. These are mathematical functions, but don't worry, we won't dive into the equations today. You don't need to understand the math to use this feature effectively. And here's what matters for your animations. If you use an easing that ends in, for example power 1 in, the Stagger intervals start out very close together. Then they gradually spread apart. The effect feels like the animation is slowing down. Let's try it. Set Stagger to total time 5 seconds, just to exaggerate the spacing and make the effect super visible. Let's hit play. And we'll notice the letters animate very quickly at the start, then each new animation begins farther and farther apart. This same logic applies to offset time as well. For example, with offset time equals 5 seconds and 13 letters, so 12 Stagger intervals, the total duration will be 12 times 5 equals 60 seconds, plus 1 second for the final animation. So the full sequence takes over a minute, and you can clearly see how the intervals expand as the animation progresses. If you use an easing that ends in out, for example power 1 out, the animation starts slowly. Then the Stagger intervals get closer and closer. The effect feels like it's speeding up over time. Set the easing to power 1 out, keep total time equals 5 seconds and hit play. You'll see large gaps between the first letters and tighter spacing at the end. So, to recap, in means fast start and slow finish. Out means slow start, fast finish, and actually we also have in-out, which means starts slow, speeds up, then slows down again. Now, you can also try more unusual easing options like back, bounce, or elastic, but be aware, some of these produce unexpected or strange effects. Let me show you a few examples. Let's pick back out. You'll see odd, non-uniform spacing. It's really hard to tell what logic it's following. Then let's try bounce in. The timing feels almost random, with bouncy delays that don't align predictably. And finally, let's test elastic in out. You'll get an extremely quirky, unpredictable reveal, almost playful but very chaotic. So yes, this was a long and detailed walkthrough, but I really hope it gave you a solid foundation on how staggered animations work inside Webflow's new GSAP-Powered interface. It's definitely not the easiest tool to learn. It's new, it's deep, and it requires some patience. But once you understand how each part works, from stagger logic to split text, easing and masking, you can start creating some truly dynamic and beautiful animations. So, what did we cover? We learned how to target text elements and break them down with split text. We explored the difference between offset time and total time and how they change the pacing of your animation. We experimented with split types like word and letter, and we saw how masking creates smoother reveals. And finally, we dove into stagger easing to control how those delays feel over time, from linear to chaotic and everything in between. Everything you saw today is part of a fully clonable Webflow project, so feel free to play around, make changes, and use it as a base for your own website. If you want to explore more Webflow plus GSAP experiments, I've got tons of tutorials waiting for you on the channel. And if you have questions or weird edge cases you'd like me to cover, drop them in the comments. I read every single one. And if you found this helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more Webflow tips and tricks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Matane!